Print media has been drowning, despite its importance for decades. For a time, most Americans got their news from the television, often without knowing that the television functions as analysis for print media. And to this day, TV news stations cite most of their stories from the papers. Despite this, most revenue for the news goes to the television. In the US, news is run through private money, corporations. This isn't inherently bad, but it leads to three primary issues with the system of news consumption. First, the profit motive encourages dramatized news coverage of what may be interesting rather than honest news coverage of what is important. Second, political beliefs of journalists bias the way the information is given to an audience, especially as it relates to news that covers controversial politics. Third, the way audiences consume the product of news is often irresponsible. Since news media is mostly private, American journalists have to create something profitable in order to keep writing. Due to the way media is run, news is a 24-hour cycle. This cycle is necessary, but it's not without flaw. When an event like September 11th happens, people need to be aware of it all the time, from its introduction to its conclusion, and then afterwards they need to know the ramifications. By definition, in order for them to keep working, they have to keep pulling readers and viewers in when an event like 9/11 isn't happening. So when there's no valuable news to speak of, there are few ways for news stations, papers, etc. to make money. The staple of a successful platform is access to advertising. Journalists need to be pulling in viewership when there is no valuable news to speak of. And they need to be doing that because they need to make money, because journalism is a job. The staple of a successful platform is advertising. That advertising is only available to those who can amass an audience. It's a system which necessitates sensationalism, or as it's known with the youngsters, clickbait. When it comes to advertising, the more modern the mode of news is, the more precise the advertiser can be as far as who their product is reaching. Ad dollars in newspapers are basically made by paying an outlet a flat fee to write a small blurb on the company. On radio, advertisers can get a general idea of how many radios are turned to the station when their commercial plays. Then they can see if their sales are increased. Based on this information, they can decide whether to advertise there again. On television, the system gets more refined. Advertisers can find out how many televisions are tuned in to a channel, where they are tuned in most, what service provider is tuning them in, and the age of who is watching before they ever pay a single cent in ad revenue. More precise still is the internet. YouTube is a system where there are two ways to make money off of advertisers. The first is to have a video presenter discuss the product in the video itself. They place a link to where they can buy it in the description. If that link is clicked, then the content creators get a few cents. If the product is purchased, then they also receive a small commission. This system is similar to television advertising due to the need for the channel and the product creator having a need to be in contact with each other. Therefore, there's an inherent danger of bias. However, the other way that YouTube can give money to content makers is by running ads that the content creator does not choose. Neither do the advertisers before the video begins. This helps remove the danger of bias in some ways, and it's more precise than the television. The advertisers can pick the age, the gender, and the interests of the people they want to advertise to. The danger, however, is that they cannot choose the general message of the video they want to advertise on. The danger intensifies when the audiences for those videos can be made a matter of public record. The specificity that algorithms give to viewers can result in bad PR for a company. The system is far from perfect. Due to the Wild West style of internet creators, YouTube has felt forced to crack down on independent creators in order to make the content more family-friendly. Unfortunately, this has affected the ad revenue for all non-corporate channels. bringing us back to the format of TV news, which again has a specific kind of bias. Since TV news is not independent and it is not public, there is a strong motivation towards a specific kind of political bias. There are really only 4 kinds of easy to access news in the United States. Those are newspapers, television news, radio news, and online publication. With the exception of a few options, our news is delivered by for-profit, private companies. Everyone in all kinds of media are competing for views, and each view makes a little bit of money. One of the reasons we have a free press in the United States is to act as a shield against government misinformation and lying in the government. And really, it's meant to act that way against all forms of power. Ideally, news gives people the information about what politicians stand for, how their claims stack up against facts, and when needed, exposes dishonesty and corruption. Government control over news would mean that the government could lie to us and we'd be none the wiser, theoretically. The problem this introduces is simple. Individuals are fallible, and they all have opinions or beliefs that bias their opinions. The common bias for most news pundits, and I'm specifically referring to TV news punditry, is one of leftism on cultural issues and right-leaning on economic issues. On the other side, there is right for both cultural and economic issues. However, there is no major news station that would fall generally left in the opinions of the hosts. I don't think this is a backroom conspiracy theory. I think in the hiring process, the candidates for positions on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox are vetted against the culture of newsrooms. And in the early days, they would have been vetted against the desired culture of those newsrooms. When we acknowledge that the purpose of any company is to make money, it becomes clear the reason why vetting against those individuals with further left economic ideas would be happening. The further left someone is, the more they would want the larger revenue of the network to function in helping society rather than the company. And that could potentially hurt the profits of the company or embarrass advertisers. One of the ways this bias comes out is in the form of self-preservation. In the 2016 presidential race, WikiLeaks released emails and speeches that the DNC and Hillary Clinton found embarrassing, especially in light of her presidential race. Remember, it's illegal to possess these stolen documents. It's different for the media. So everything you learn about this, you're learning from us. Chris Cuomo said that, and it's not true. We could put on our tinfoil hats and say it was a pro-Hillary conspiracy, but it seems more likely that Cuomo just would prefer you come to CNN for the information because it leads to better ratings and therefore more money to his company. The negative of this self-preservation bias is that he has lied about whether or not people can collect information for themselves. More specifically, he has directly contradicted a Supreme Court precedent. Functionally, this is a total failure of journalism, which in theory exists to keep people informed. Bias, as far as conscious beliefs of individuals, is one thing, but there's also societal bias. The Overton window is a symbol used to describe the location of acceptable discourse in a given setting. The news is often where people experience political discourse, through debate coverage during presidential races, opinion pieces, and on-air discussion of the political landscape. In other words, throughout the 90s and 2000s, what is allowed to be discussed in politics has started to be set by television channels. The right-leaning economic bias of CNN and MSNBC, coupled with the general right-wing bias of channels like Fox News, has led to a broken news media system wherein the Overton window sits on the right side of most every issue. Forms of media bias are not restricted to financial gain and political groupthink. Ideally, journalists would not have any bias. A good journalist strives for objectivity, and there are clear advantages to that endeavor, which should be self-explanatory. To the degrees which they are unfounded, unfair, or unexplainable, biases are essentially dishonest. See Jake Tapper in the 2019 CNN debate. Tapper directed a series of questions framed from a right-wing perspective to the candidates, especially on the issue of healthcare. How can we pay for it, and so on. By attempting to report on a middle ground between a radically far-right wing and a moderately far-right wing, Tapper fails to speak truth to power. In more specific and less lofty language, Tapper's obsession with not showing bias has allowed wrongness to dominate the conversation. The way this happens is by neutrality. Jake Tapper has taken the neutral ground between Mitch McConnell and Bernie Sanders.